Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Eterneva's IG Live series. Thank you so much for bearing with us as we figure this all out. You know, the internet changes every day, and we just kind of learn to go with the flow. But I have an amazing guest here with me today. Her name is Sarah Shaoul. She is from Grief, Gratitude, Greatness. She is a life coach, a podcast host, a writer, and that doesn't even begin to cover it. So, Sarah, I would love if you could just introduce yourself a little bit and just tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hi. Yes, thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Sarah Shaoul, and I host the podcast Grief, Gratitude, and Greatness, where we explore the different ways that people grieve, the gratitude that allows us to persevere, and the greatness that we discover along the way. I can tell you a little bit about how I came into this work. I was a small business owner most of my adult life, and I had retail stores, and I loved engaging with other people, and but I really was never paying attention to grief. And once I started to notice how impactful grief was, I full on threw myself into this exploration, which is what led me to the podcast.
I mean, absolutely amazing. And just from having our little bit of conversations with you before, definitely feel like you found a space that you thrive in, and are providing so much help. So thank you so much for talking to us. Today, I would love to talk a little bit more about parenting through grief.
Yeah.
I just feel like right now, in general, that's such a big topic that I think resonates with so many of us. But especially right now, Mother's Day is coming up on Sunday. A lot of us are experiencing grief in our own homes in a myriad of different ways, and parents especially, I think, are going through a whole new experience with their children. So I would love to just hear a little bit more about your philosophy there and your experiences there, because I feel like that would just hit home so well right now.
Well, a lot of what informs how I help others parent through grief is that just observing how, as a child, I grew up where everyone ignored grief, and everyone. I grew up with so much love in my family, so I'm a really well-adjusted adult. But that love tried to make up for this loss rather than address the loss. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is to acknowledge your grief and your child's grief, right? It's also really difficult for you to be able to even, it's so hard to parent. It's hard to take care of yourself and have to take care of others. And that's a number one question I get asked quite often by grieving parents is, how do I care for my child? And the number one answer is you need to care for yourself first.
Yeah. I think that's it. People, and the word self-care gets thrown around so much, but I don't think people really sometimes have that holistic context to what it means, and I just, from the work that you're doing, what have you seen just be really good and even simple examples of self-care that maybe parents easily forget, especially when it comes to, hectic lifestyles that we have?
Well, and I think we have to really expand our, how we view self-care. Self-care isn't just, and not to minimize anything, but it isn't getting a pedicure or having a bubble bath or a massage. Self-care is also getting your act together. Self-care is making sure that your bills are getting paid on time. Self-care is making sure that your home is a place that feels good to be in. Yeah. Well, and particularly at this time when we're at home so much. And it's a really challenging time too when you're feeling more isolated than ever.
Yeah.
As we're in quarantine, as you're trying to take care of children. Some people are trying to work. If those who aren't trying to work are trying to navigate everything from unemployment to PPP loans, um, and um, and also trying to help their kids attend school. We're also teachers aides. It's an incredible time, and it's very, very taxing. So so another thing, part of taking care of yourself, and especially when you feel like you're on this Groundhog's Day uh, hamster wheel, is you have to anchor yourself in ritual, right?
Yes.
And so that can look like all kinds of different things. It can be like making sure that you do your yoga stretches every morning. It can mean getting up 20 minutes early and having that cup of tea where you look out the window. It can be your dog walk every day. You need to anchor yourself in a ritual that allows you to step away from all the noise,
Mhm.
and it's meditative. All these things can be very meditative.
I actually think that that kind of lens on self-care is so helpful, because I definitely remember when I was first, when it was becoming a new kind of idea for me, because I definitely come from a people pleaser mentality where everything else probably came first other than me.
Mm.
I probably saw that behavior from my parents. I'm sure a lot of people experience those things. I learned that, like, when I first saw self-care, you're right. I thought it was bath bombs and glitter and I don't know, all these other fun things, but I'm probably more at a realization now that self-care can be really boring. Things like brushing your teeth, doing your laundry, like it's commitments that you make to yourself, and they're called commitments for a reason. And we can call them rituals, but it's nice, I think, to realize that that's why the day-to-day becomes so important. It is grounding you. So I think that's a really nice way to open it up to people.
Yes.
I Oh, yes, go on.
Well, I was going to say, particularly in this time, I think it's a very difficult time um, for people because every day does feel exactly the same as the previous day. And so when when I speak about ritual, I'm talking about a time that's really intentional,
Yeah.
you know, even if it's just going and standing in your backyard. The other night, I wouldn't necessarily call this ritual, but sometimes you have to do something that's so out of the norm too. Like, I got out in the street and we socially distanced with our neighbors, and danced in the middle of the street at night. It was so fun. And I'm not saying you always have to look to make everything fun, but being open to something you would never have done before is a really wonderful thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is definitely a good time to, find out what those things are. Have you, at least in this experience over the last few months, have you seen new ways that maybe parents have been able to connect with their children in different ways in particular? I mean, I know just for a lot of people, they're spending more time with their children than ever before because normally the children are at school. How have you seen people maybe approach it during a time like this?
Yeah, I'm thinking about a woman that I had on my podcast, who lost her husband when her child was just a few months old. And I remember asking her the question because she said a lot of people would come and take her daughter and go have experiences with her daughter.
Mhm.
And she said it was really important because her daughter needed to be with somebody who was happy.
Yeah.
She needed to have that displayed for her. And I think the challenge in this moment, and I do actually know another woman who's she's she's separated from her child's father, and he died a few weeks ago. And one of the beautiful things, because she is very sad and she wants her daughter to be able to engage with others, but you can't right now, except for the way you and I are. But that's not totally true. So what happened, and I thought this was so incredible, and someone captured this. Her child was playing tic-tac-toe and writing messages through. They had I don't know if they were like wax crayons or something, and they were writing on the window to each other.
Yeah.
Through the window, the big picture window. And that is just so incredible that people are getting so creative and innovative about how they engage in community, and community is essential. And one other thing I always say about grief is you have to be witnessed,
Yeah.
and then your community has to witness you and hold you. And whether that's going to be in a Google Hangout or a Instagram or a Zoom call, or maybe that's just having friends stand outside your window.
Yeah. I think no, it's that's exactly how I was thinking about it too, and why building and having such a good community like this is so important. And that's why I love the foundations of having a grief community, because everyone's going to experience it at some point, and they're going to lose someone maybe that's so close to them that they feel that support go away. But if you start thinking about it now, or I spoke to Alicia Fornright yesterday, who's hosting Motherless Mother's Day, a series that's Reimagine, and it's an entire community of women and people that have lost their mothers, who can band together at a time that's so hard for them and have someone to lean on, and virtually. And they're also doing it virtually. So I think it's very smart to even think ahead of things like this too, to think of your community as your resource right now.
And I think I know that what I hear often is that you can be really surprised by the community that ends up holding you up in these situations, because sometimes the people that are the closest to you might not be the ones that show up in the way that you need them to. And
Yeah.
so it is important to plug into grief groups and other organizations where you are so welcomed by people who get it. That's what I hear often. People who get it. They know what it's like. They know what it's like to have been there. And there's this magical connection that I know that I've had with people, that there's this just underlying trust, because they know that you've gone through it. They know that you understand, right? They know that they can laugh around you without being judged. They know that you're not going to ask a stupid triggering question, and so and they also know that they can be real, right? Because another thing that happens with people who are grieving, they feel like they have to the reverse happens, where they have to take care of everybody else and make sure everyone else feels comfortable.
Yeah. I that particular experience at the end feels so right to me, because I remember when I lost my brother, like the worst times of my life, I probably put on a smile more than any other time, tried to please people more than any other time. And it's interesting. I've never been more exhausted trying to pretend to be happy. So other people could maybe feel comfortable around me, or my parents could feel comfortable, or anyone else could feel comfortable except for me. So I think being honest and acknowledging on it, like that's a very big life journey to go on, but I think it's a good one to realize now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also really important. And I actually just listened to David Kessler talking about this the other day, and it really, it's so true, and something I talk about, but it's something that I think is really good for us all to be reminded by, that we shouldn't compare our grief to someone else's grief, or compare how someone else is grieving, right? And I think especially when we come to a day like Mother's Day, there's a lot of assuming that goes on, right? Like assuming like, oh, this must really be a shitty day for you. Well, it might be, but maybe it's not. And so we have to be very thoughtful about how we hold those who are grieving. I mean, there are mothers that are grieving the loss of their children, and that is very, very difficult. And just reaching out to those people, and just reach out to those people on Sunday and just say, I love you. I'm thinking of you.
Yeah.
Right? I know, as someone who lost their mother as a very young person, I really, like, Mother's Day was such a difficult day for me, always. I didn't feel comfortable around other people making, all the kids in school making Mother's Day cards. That was really tough, right? And but then I became a mother, and it changed
Changes
dramatically.
it. You get to be the person that you wanted to be to your daughter, and I think that, and then you can that holiday. I don't know, and I can't speak for you, but maybe it brings a lot more meaning, like a lot more layers to maybe what it could possibly mean too. So
Well, I think it's interesting. I think, you said the word meaning, and I think we should be careful about how much meaning we apply to certain things. Like Mother's Day, we
yeah,
sure do apply a lot of meaning to Mother's Day, right?
yeah,
And I mean, mothers are the best, right? They are the apex. But some people have really complicated relationships with their mothers, right? And so not everyone feels like their mother is the best. There are people that are grieving poor relationships with their mothers. There are people grieving estrangement from family. Um, and and there are people who have lost children who they're still mothers,
yeah.
even if their kids aren't here. And they still get to celebrate, if they choose, they get to celebrate that gift of motherhood that they got to enjoy for the time that they did, and they maybe are still enjoying that time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just such a lovely and compassionate way to, I think that's what we're all trying to do here is, how can we become more compassionate, understanding people, and realize that there's just so many lens on, grief. We use grief as one word, but it's millions, and so I think it's so eye-opening to see how you look at it. I would love to share with the audience as well. Just so everyone knows, this has been Sarah Shaoul. We're talking about parenting through grief. If you have other, resources on your website or podcasts, are there anything that you can offer to our audience, to learn more about how to, hear other people's stories or learn how to become more compassionate this way? I would love if you could share that.
Yeah, well, I think of the podcast as just a library of resources. So there are podcasts on all different kinds of grief, right? And I really strive to find people with interesting stories that are compelling, where people can relate, and what I hear often is that they don't feel alone because there's somebody else that had an experience that's similar, or they're inspired by a story to move forward in their lives. I think it's so important, and the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing and so many others is, it's like a public education piece, right? It's we didn't we don't really have a culture around how we address grief and how we grieve. We don't have a lot of ritual that's directly associated with how we grieve in this country. And so we have to create that for ourselves. And one of the first thing we really must do is stop judging how people grieve, and we must stop avoiding it, because avoiding grief just makes that grief turn into anxiety. And I often will say that, grief is not a mental health issue, but when grief is not addressed, it can easily become one.
Yes. And I think that's why it's so closely tied here in the US to conversations about mental health, because for so long, not to speak for all of us, but a lot of us, push it down in different ways, avoid it in a million ways. So I think that resonates. I think those are amazing takeaways. Everybody stop judging and just leave an open heart. But also do whatever you want, because I can't tell you what to do. But
right, but just give people the space to grieve.
Yeah.
Stop rushing people. And you know what? Grief. Once you're grieving, it's always there. It's always there, and it'll come up whenever it wants to come up. Okay, so just let people be with that. Stop rushing them through it, and stop being surprised, like, oh, didn't that happen whatever time ago? Right? It's a pain that resides within you always. and it comes up and it goes away at its own rhythm. And as soon as we begin to accept that as truth,
Yeah.
we're all going to be just so much better for it.
I mean, so beautifully said. Couldn't have said it as well myself. I mean, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Sarah Shaoul of Grief, Gratitude, Greatness. Go check out her website. She writes lots of blog posts. She has a podcast. I will be listening to more of your stories. They are so inspiring to me already. If anyone needs anything else, you can always DM Donnie. I'm here at Eterneva, or Sarah at Grief, Gratitude, Great. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful, amazing weekend, and happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.